Testing.
Testing,
We know
testing.
you are.
Right, so we're just recording now.
That looks like beer to me.
all alcoholic drinks are fine, all non-alcoholic drinks indeed as well. But we are just going to be talking about gin today. My name is Ruth. I think I've seen all your faces before. But I run Clifton Wine School. I have a diploma in wines and spirits, and I teach up to sort of vocational equivalent to A-level in wine and GCSE in spirits. But do forgive me a little bit today because although I do teach the spirits and I have the qualification in spirits, it's not my everyday job. So there might be, if there's something that you ask me and I don't know, I might have to just Google it. But I know more than most people do about spirits. But yeah, just to put that
I know. Put it on the thing.
More than I do.
Hang on a minute.
Before we start the tasting proper, could you just sort of hold up what bottles you have, or tell me just so I can see what? Oh, lovely. Yep, got some Gordons. Oh, you've got a choice of gins. Lovely, lots of Gordons, lots of Castilgi. That's a new one.
No.
Oh,
yes,
one.
Lidl in Spain, €5 a bottle.
Oh, a Gordon's again. Lovely. I
tonic.
can't see that one, Anna. What does that say?
That's Malta.
Lime Bay.
Oh, nice. Is it a good one?
It smells nice.
It looks like a nice bottle.
Anna, that was
Oh yeah, wow, 2 options down there as well. Oh, lovely. I got Sip Smiths.
You saw it, luckily.
I can do a little
I didn't see what that said.
snap the tom there. Lovely. Cool. Okay. So what we'll do is I'll put you all onto kind of mutual for a bit. I'll talk about gin for a little bit, and then we'll come back and have some questions. Then I'll talk about gin for a little bit longer. Then we'll come back and have some questions. Then at the end, what I would like you to do, if possible, is to have an empty glass with you and some gin. So you could pour a little tiny bit of it out neat into a glass, so you could taste it a little bit like that. And then we'll see how it changes as we dilute it just little bit by little bit, and we'll have a little play around with it then. But for now, for the bulk of the tasting, just enjoy a gin and tonic whilst I'm talking. So don't feel like you have to wait for me to sort of guide a tasting. I trust that you're all going to enjoy your lovely glasses of gin and or red wine, depending on what you have in your glass.
Or white wine.
Or white wine, indeed, whatever it is. Lovely. Does anybody have any questions before we start? Is everybody happy with where the chat option is if they want to ask any questions whilst you're mute and all that? Yeah. Good. Lovely. Right. So, how to mute you all. Haha, power. Okay, so you are now all muted, but you do all have the power to unmute yourself as well. So if you would like to, then you can do that. I'll try to limit the amount of glare that is coming onto the screen from behind me. So I did send you out all an email with some PDFs, which shows you just a few bits of information about gin, which I'm going to kind of work through. So I won't be sharing with you on the screen any of the slides, but I've sent them all to you on an email. So just let me know if anybody hasn't received that. They were sent earlier today, a few hours ago, to most people. So hopefully you will have access to that as well. But essentially, we're going to start on the slide 3. The first thing we're going to talk about is Gordon's gin. So could you hold up your Gordon's again if you've bought the Gordon's gin? Some of you do. Yeah, there's a few of you. Lovely, excellent. Gordon's is the classic. It's the world's leading #1 gin brand. It is consistently in the top 10 of all spirits brands worldwide. And that doesn't include the fake Gordons that you get as well. I can remember as a teenager, we went to India on holiday and we were purchasing, obviously we would never have bought alcohol at that age in a foreign country, but theoretically somebody else was purchasing bottles of Gordons and stuff, and all kinds of people have been copying Gordons around the world, but even just the actual Gordons is the biggest selling. I think they sell something like 5 million cases of spirit a year, which is a lot. That's an awful lot of alcohol that they sell. They are the classic. They haven't changed their recipe since 1769. And when people think about the classic flavour of gin, that is normally the style that they think of. That's not the original type of gin that was available. We'll talk about, oh, we've got an extra person coming. We will talk about the original kind of gin that came before this style of gin. But since the juniper dominant dry style was founded, if you like, then Gordon's is essentially what we think of as the classic. So we've got Catherine has just joined. Might just give her a second. Hello. Hi. We've just started. So, all right. First of all, we're going to talk about what is gin. So gin first appears as a word in modern use, as in recorded and written down, in the 18th century in Samuel Johnson's diary, and it talks about as a contracted drink from Geneva. Now, Geneva is Dutch for juniper, so that's where we get the word from. So if you ever get it, it's quite like a popular pub quiz question. Where does gin originate from? It's actually a Dutch drink originally, and that's where the word comes from. So gin is derived from Geneva, and that means juniper. It is best described today as a neutral spirit. Are we happy with what that means? Nodding a bit. So a bit like a vodka, a pretty flavourless spirit, basically. The base spirit doesn't have much flavour at all. It's fairly neutral. And it's flavoured with a multitude of different flavourings. We normally would refer to those as botanicals. You might see that written on a lot of labels. And those are aromatic compounds that we use to flavour the gin. But for it to really be gin, and people do push the boundaries a bit with what gin is, with like Mandarin gin and stuff like that. But if it's really, really legally gin, then it should have the dominant flavour should be juniper, which is again where it gets the name from Geneva. The base spirit is normally made from grain. So it's like a vodka that is made from a grain spirit. So what I might just do is unmute you all. Are people happy with distillation?
Yes. Yeah. Love it. Yeah. Absolutely love it.
Absolutely.
Well, you been doing it or appreciating it?
Either.
So tell me, what is distillation? What happens?
You heat it up and then it drops back down.
Well, you intensify the alcohol, do you not, by
Yes.
getting rid of the water?
Excellent. Yeah, I think I've got like a kind of a slightly crude picture I can show you here. I don't know if how well this will show up of there, but we heat up one lot of liquid. Say the red circles there, that's the alcohol particles in the liquid. We heat it up and the red particles will evaporate before the water particles will, because alcohol evaporates first. So we can then collect that and then leave behind a load of the water. Does that make sense on a very crude kind of level? So it evaporates just under 80 degrees, whereas water, as we probably know, is normally 100 degrees. And so we can evaporate it off, and that concentrates the alcohol. And depending on how many times you do that, the more concentrated the alcohol is going to be. So there's two major different types of still that this can take place in, and we'll talk about those a little bit later on as well. But generally speaking, that is the process. But because all we're doing is concentrating the alcohol, we have to have alcohol there to start off with. So there has to be an alcoholic liquid, which means we have to have fermented something first. So for example, if you're making brandy, that would be wine. You're just going to like ferment the grapes, produce a wine, and then you'll distill that, and then you'll get brandy. Or if it's a vodka, it can be anything you like. If it's a whiskey, it will be barley, potentially a mixture of different grains. And normally with gin as well, it will historically be a grain spirit as well. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about grain spirits, that's what we mean. They're making a beer out of the grain first, and then they're going to distill the beer several times to make it really, really
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
cool. Any questions about that? Right, I might just mute you all again. Oh, hello, Catherine, as well. So welcome. By the way, we have all started drinking gin and tonic, so don't be polite and hold off on the tasting of it. Help yourself. Cheers.
Cheers. What you got?
Lovely.
there?
Does anybody have any questions at this point?
Oh, thank you.
What do you want? Do you want more of this, or do you try the?
I'll try one of those.
Okay, so you've all been muted again, and again, you do have the power to unmute yourself if you want. So we have this neutral grain spirit, and we're going to flavour it predominantly with the flavour of juniper. And again, we're going to talk in a minute about the different ways that we can do that. There are different ways that we can do it in terms of quality or what style of what drink we want to produce. But then, generally speaking, we bottle it and we sell it as that. When most people think about gin, they think about a clear liquid. They don't normally think about an aged liquid that's been aged in wood. You know how whiskey and brandy and aged spirits, they tend to have a browner colour. Sometimes they get coloured, like rum gets coloured with caramel colouring and stuff like that. But usually, if you've aged a spirit, it will be a browner colour. We don't normally expect gin to have any colour at all. So you do see on the market, there are people, especially now that gin's become really popular, people then start doing all kinds of things with it and messing around with it. And people are selling oak-aged gin, but arguably you could say it's not really gin. Does that make sense? It's just another flavoured spirit, another flavoured vodka, if you like. Cool. So, why juniper? That's one of the questions on the slides. So juniper, are we all happy with what juniper is? A little bit. So it's a berry. So it's a berry. It's found in like kind of shrubland, and it's quite potent, and it's got a kind of quite resinous character. It's quite bitter. And it used to be really quite common around Europe, especially like Highland part of Europe, like the Netherlands and England. And it was often found on moorland when that type of ground was a bit more prominent. Whereas these days there's less of it available. The reason why you might hear sometimes they say we're going to run out of gin. They like doing that in the press these days, scaring people and putting headlines that we're going to run out of gin. We're not going to run out of gin. We're going to run out of juniper berries. Is what they're worried about. Today, the different juniper berries are brought in from all over the world because they're nowhere near as just growing in the wild as they used to be. But juniper, with its sort of bitter resinous flavours, it had sort of balsamic warmth, they describe it as the character, as well as sort of citrusy, which made it smell fresh and clean. And a lot of people used to believe that this sort of potent smell would ward off diseases. So diseases like the plague, like the Black Death, and other things as well. So, I mean, people, you can't really blame them. They didn't, this is before they knew that germs existed and stuff. And so they would, you know, the wiser people would sort of notice that around places that really stank unpleasantly, like where you go to the toilet or where food was rotten or something like that, people were more likely to get ill. So they thought that the smells were very much linked to making people ill, which they kind of are in a weird way, but it's not the smell that does it, if that makes sense. So they thought that the smell from the juniper would ward off and protect people, but it didn't. So that's one of the reasons it became so popular. Also, they made really horrible spirits. So they weren't very good at distilling things. They didn't have really good knowledge about the cut-off points. I don't know. So for example, people, when I was younger, I think I used to hear about people making spirits themselves and having their own little mini distillation, little still distillation device. And people talking about them maybe making themselves go blind and stuff from doing this. And the reason that we get this kind of chat is because many people didn't understand about what we call now the heads and the tails of a distillation. So the heads is the most volatile parts of the distillation. And that's a load of stuff like methane. It's really unpleasant and stuff you don't want to concentrate and then like drink. So it's really bad for your health. And lots of fusel oils and stuff at the end that, again, is not very pleasant and you don't want to drink. And all these things also, they don't taste very nice. And they used to also use turpentine and all kinds of stuff in the stills in the making of the spirits. And again, doesn't taste very nice. So juniper and its lovely potency and its sort of bitterness and its clean tasting qualities made it a really good thing for masking the smells of the horrible alcohol. Does that make sense? So in a way, it was about kind of hiding negative things. Yeah, so on your little sheet, I sent you like some pictures of on the email I sent out of some different types of botanicals. Essentially, you can use all kinds of flavors as botanicals in gin. There's no exhaustive list, but the major ones you see very frequently and the ones that combine really nicely together, I've put into that PDF for you, but I'll just explain a few of them. So we talked about juniper. Juniper very much has to be the main flavor for it to be officially gin, but very, very frequently you'll also get coriander seed in there as well. Obviously we use this in cookery a lot. We get a nice sort of spicy, gingery characteristic from it, quite citrus. Sometimes they just use the essential oil from coriander seed, and that's called linalool, if you ever see that on an ingredients list. And that, again, it gives this gingery sort of spicy characteristic. You get 3 main types. That depends on where the plant comes from, so where it's native to. There's the Moroccan coriander seed, and that will give you the most peppery style of flavor. There is the East European or Russian native plant, and that will give you a slightly floral characteristic and a bit more citrus. And then there's another one that's really popular, which is the Indian plant, and that is the most citrus. So that will give you the most citrus character. And if you smell your gins, you might notice almost all gins will have this sort of citrusy character in it, and a lot of that will come from coriander seeds. As well, we frequently get angelica root and orris root. So angelica root is to give kind of musky, earthy, woody flavors, and then often used in small amounts to sort of balance out the flavors that you get that are more fruity from the other flavorings, from the other botanicals. And it's a little bit like when you get bitters in a cocktail, it's like something almost unpleasant tasting that raises the rest of the flavor profile up. So it does that, it adds that extra complexity and makes it nicer. Orris root, which is used as a kind of fixative for the flavors. So it's not so much in there to give extra flavor. It has a kind of woody flavor itself as well. But the main purpose for it there is because it works as like a stabilizer for all the rest of the flavors there. They use it a lot in the production of perfumes and cosmetics for the same purpose. I think it's quite expensive. So it's going to be used more in your sort of nicer quality gins. You see that on a lot of lists. We've got different fruit peels, normally citrus peels, work really well. They can be dried and put in stills. Grapefruit, quite bitter. Lemons, quite fresh. And sweet orange can be used to, give obviously sweet orange flavour. But if you does anybody have the Plymouth gin? I don't think anybody did. But the Plymouth gin, one of their key ingredients is the sweet orange peel. They really like that profile. And then Beefeater is well known for its bitter orange profile as well. And they combine really nicely with the coriander seed, giving it that extra sort of citrus character. And then finally, we've got our other things that we can add. So licorice root can give it a bit of spice and sweetness. Almonds can be used, and they can sort of give it a sort of marzipan type characteristic. Cinnamon as well for tropical spice, and then cardamom gives it kind of a menthol flavour. But it's an endless list of different things, and most gin producers won't actually tell you what the full list, or certainly how they make their gin exactly, because they keep it like as the best kept secret. But a lot of these are the most common different botanicals that they use. Right, so I'll just unmute you all again. So, has anybody got any questions about that?
Yeah, can I ask something, Ruth? About
Yes, of course.
you said that the problem is perhaps a lack of juniper. You know, that would have some impact on making gin. Is juniper only grown in the wild, or can it be cultivated? Or
That's a good question. I think as far as I know, it can be cultivated, but they don't do it, and it's not commercially done here at the moment that I'm aware of. I might just have to look that up whilst we do the tasting.
Yeah.
It looks like Anna might have put her hand up like she knew something.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's with their wild to do it.
Hold on one moment, Ted. What did you say, Anna?
Surely it would be worth Gordon Gin's while to cultivate juniper, or create their own style of juniper. You know?
Oh yeah,
Surely,
I think Anna knows something about that. If you just hold on a sec.
I think it's quite interesting because I'm originally from Russia, and like we grow juniper. Like everyone who has a garden, they grow juniper. But gin is not that common in Russia. Like literally no one drinks it. So I guess you can grow it in like your garden because it's so common there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You'd be able to get seed probably somewhere.
Yeah, I imagine that you can grow anything commercially if you want to. But I think it used to be it used to be bountiful and plentiful here, but it isn't anymore.
Yeah. I do happen to have some juniper oil here.
Oh, nice.
I can't, unfortunately.
It doesn't smell like gin.
I can't, unfortunately, pass it around. But it's got a lovely citrus. I mean, this is very concentrated. This is pure oil. It's got a lovely, lovely citrus smell to it, and really beautiful, actually. And especially when it's put in a carrier oil, it smells even better.
Anyway, and it's stopping you getting the Black Plague at the same time as well.
Oh,
so.
probably, yeah.
And maybe COVID-19 as well.
And maybe, yes.
Yeah.
Perhaps you mix it with a bit of bleach.
Can I ask what you use the juniper oil for?
Aromatherapy.
So what is it? Is it relaxing or invigorating or?
Yeah, it's particularly good for women's gynae problems.
Oh.
Okay.
Is that with the gin?
With the gin, yeah, you got to have the gin with it, of course.
Definitely with the gin.
Add a drop to the gin.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a couple of things in the chat.
By what you were saying, because there's so many parallels with aromatherapy, amazingly. You know,
I could imagine actually, yeah, because all the flavors in gin come from, and a lot of it, like especially the gin that you get, the cheapest gins you can get, are literally just they add the essential oils. They use probably very similar, but sort of food grade instead of therapy grade. But
no, I wouldn't like to drink this somehow. I don't think it'd do me much good.
No.
Cheaper to use gin for your aromatherapy.
Yeah. They complement each other very well.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Can I also ask, Ruth, what do you think it is that makes? You said the last time I was taking part in this thing that there's fashions, aren't there? Trends in alcohol use, like with rosé. What is it? Do you think that makes gin fashionable at any given time? Why would people be?
Well, I think it's because it's so fresh, and it's that style where, like, so in wine at the moment, it's very much like Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Grigio and things that are very fresh. And again, gin has that character. It's very clean and crisp. It's very dry, and the bitterness makes people think it's even drier than it is.
Right.
It's not it's not overwhelming like a lot of whiskies can be, and also you're supposed to water it down. So you won't find I mean, I know a lot of martinis are almost essentially just pure gin, and most people, when they consume gin, are watering it down to whatever strength that they want it to be. So they can have it stronger if they want, or weaker if they want. And that, again, I think makes it more attractive to just a much wider group of people. But yeah, why now? I don't know. Well, actually, I know one of the reasons why the new wave is here, the very recent like fashion is people like this. So this is Sipsmith. So have people, I know Tom's got this bottle there, have people come across this brand before?
I've heard of it.
Some people might. So about 15, 20 years ago, how old am I? How long have I been working in wine? So around about 5 years into my work in the wine trade, in the alcohol trade, these guys came into the store and they were selling Sipsmiths. They were selling us this gin that they were making in their distillery in London. It's the first time in years someone had set up a new distillery in London, and they were using these like old-fashioned pot stills like they used to make, similar to the type of still that they'd be using in cognac and places, but using it multiple times to bring it up to a higher alcohol level than you would with brandy or a whiskey. And really pushing this sort of craft gin idea, as opposed to the sort of standard, which had remained the same for decades, which was your Gordon, your Tanqueray, those kind of big brands that had been around, but no one was playing with it as a style of drink. And I think these guys just saw a gap in the market. They'd seen other things become craft and all that, and they just decided that gin was the one that they were going to really make their own. And since then, they also started pushing. That's why I've chosen these brands, so I can sort of show you, because they're big players in this movement. Is Fever-Tree, which again they are. Yeah, there you go, excellent. I approve. Give you one for a day. And they have introduced this idea that you should spend a lot more money and a lot more time worrying about who and what is in your tonic, into your mixer, because that's going to be, for most people, the majority of the drink. And so between the two of them, they've kind of then brought along this new modern wave. But that, again, has then created a second backlash, if you like. Not a backlash, but other people who have then just cottoned onto the idea of gin being a lovely, lovely drink. But they don't then, they don't all feel like they have to buy the craft version. So people like Lidl are winning awards for their very affordable gins as being, one of the best in the market at a certain price point. And therefore it becomes very accessible to everybody as well.
Right.
I think that's probably partly it as well. But it's the flavour profile that suits people today.
The reason why Sipsmith started like so big on craft one, I read about it like in the law book. It's basically in 2008, when before 2008, before the crisis, the laws around the distillery of gin were quite strict, because like you were only allowed to distill it in a very voluminous batches. So many companies couldn't actually afford it because they didn't have initial capital. But then obviously the crisis came and they lowered the restrictions because they wanted to support businesses. And this is when Sipsmith actually decided they wanted to do something in smaller batches and introduce different flavors and try them out. So it was a combination of economic reasons, so trying out.
Interesting. So was that to do with Gordon Brown as well then? Because he did a thing, he did that with craft beer, didn't he? Maybe
probably, yeah. I'm not sure about beer.
I remember hearing they were loosening the restrictions at some point, and that's what made all the new craft gin come in. But I think it's just gone a bit mad now, where lots of them are just so sweet and so pink and so We're obviously trying to appeal to a certain demographic, but they're just a bit full on in the sweet.
Yeah, I think some of those you could argue are not really gin. They're another drink altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ruth, I know that in cognac, when they're not distilling cognac, there are times when they do not have enough wine. You know, the stills have got nothing to run to make cognac, so they make vodka. Do they?
Yeah.
And they make huge quantities of vodka. Do they make gin as well? Do you know?
They might do. I don't know that they do. They've got a lot of other like spirits that they could go into. I know the Spanish make a lot of gin. I think the Italians make gin. I imagine some of the cognac producers are. But do you see much gin on sale in France? Do you get much?
No. There's not huge. I mean, it's not difficult to find, but there's not the variety. I wouldn't say.
Okay, yeah.
With you, Tom?
There is no variety, no.
No.
Whereas I think if in Italy and Spain, I don't know why it sort of seems to have missed out France a bit. Maybe it's because they've got such strong historical spirits of their own a bit. But it is very popular and definitely made in large quantities in other parts of Europe. But you don't really hear about French gin as much.
No.
French gin. Is Tanqueray a French gin? Where does Tanqueray come from?
Tanqueray?
Tanqueray.
Let me just look that up. I don't think it's French. It sounds like it should be French, doesn't it? Maybe it is, and maybe I'm just missing it.
Yeah. It's not got a French spelling.
Is it not Mexico?
I'm thinking there is a bridge of Tanqueray in Brittany, I think it is, and the same name.
Originated in London, it's now made in Scotland.
Nothing to do with France.
Oh, yeah.
It's owned by Diageo, the same people that own Gordon's.
Right.
They're the ones responsible for all those expensive adverts that we used to get in the 90s and noughties, about Guinness and stuff like that.
I've got Tanqueray from the UK, so.
Oh, there we go. We've got Tanqueray being drunk right here.
So what are the really trendy kind of gin drinks then at the moment? What would you get if you went to, the Harrods or the Savoy?
Well, I think it kind of depends where you are in the country a bit. So there are lots of local gins. I don't know if maybe we're a little bit spoiled for choice a bit in Bristol perhaps, but we've got quite a few local distilleries. We've got the Bath Gin Company, we've got Psycho Pomp, we've got
Psycho Pomp.
Psycho Pomp, I know, they make some lovely gins. We've got a number of different local ones, and I mean there's just so many. The market is just saturated now with all these new ones. So I think a lot of people do like to try and drink what's ever local to their area. But there are some ones that, I mean, I don't know if you ever come across gin mare before. It's spelled gin and then M-A-R-E, which is sort of flavoured with a bit of olive, and that's quite nice. And then different, like Chase make a nice gin, for example. But they make a whole full range of spirits that are really good, actually. But yeah, I think there's just so many. You could just pick.
And is there a lot of profitability in gin and its various offshoots?
Yeah, there's a lot. So it's obviously you can make it in more expensive ways, and if you're going to make it in a pot still instead of a coffee still or a continuous still. So I'll show you like some pictures that I have of those.
Which one? Which tonic do you want?
The one you put in there.
Tim, I have to say the fever tree tonic was delicious with my beautiful Spanish little gin. This one, however,
They sell
the
some
cake
nice
from
gin.
Knowles, it is absolutely awful.
Oh, we love this.
It does make a difference.
We love this. We love this, Mary. We think it's lovely.
Basil and lemon.
Oh, basil
Oh.
and lemon. Oh, yeah, no, that's a bit odd, isn't
No,
it?
cassia.
Cassia.
Basil and cassia, which is the same
Oh,
that they
basil.
put cassia in gin anyway.
But
Yeah,
not
but
basil.
it does say in the
But-
ingredients there's an awful lot of lemon. There's more lemon, I think.
Ah.
No.
I like
But
it.
it didn't
It's,
taste
the
anything
beauty of
like
it is
the
you can
first
pick
one.
whichever one you like the most.
Yes, that's the joy. Yeah, that's quite special.
Anyway, so
However,
I've got some
it
pictures
sense
of
a
some
bottle.
stills for you. So this is
Yes,
a
cheers.
pot still.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So you see this is where we put the liquid, so our beer or wine or whatever we're going to heat it up, and then we collect the spirit over here, and then you do that with a fire. Then we collect it, and then we stop the process because we've got as much alcohol out of there into there as we can. That is what we call a batch process. And if you're going to continue to do that several times, it's a lot more expensive than if you use a very modern still, which looks like this. And this is in this, you'll have a number of plates. You might have like 15 different plates. And on each of these different plates, you have an extra distillation process taking place. So by the time the alcohol gets to the top of here, it could be 96% alcohol, it could be 96% pure. So it's very, very efficient, and it will come out of there nice and cheap and nice and neutral. It won't have much flavour. But if you want to have it with a little bit more character and produce it in this craft way, you're probably going to have to do it like these guys in the pot still, and do that. It's a more expensive process. It's a more arduous process. It takes more time. However, whiskey is all made in that process. Cognac is made in that process. Well, not all whiskey, but some of the most expensive whiskies. And all cognac is made in that process. And then it might age for 10 years. It might age for longer. Gin, you don't have to age it. You don't have to store it, and you don't have to put it in oak barrels. You don't have to pay for those oak barrels, and you don't have to tie your money up in there. So an awful lot of people make gin in the years while they're waiting for their whiskey to get ready. Does that make sense? So if you're going to open a whiskey production area, then whilst you're waiting for your whiskies to mature, the best thing that you can do to get money coming in is to start selling a vodka and to start selling a gin. So when you think about the fact that a lot of gins these days are like 35, 40 pounds, you can get yourself a nice brandy for that. You can get yourself a nice whiskey for that that's been aged for years. So there's probably quite a nice markup, but it depends, if you're making it anything small scale, it's going to be expensive to make it. So, it depends. If you're paying £40 for a vodka or a gin that is mass made, they're making a lot of money off it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think what's that Grey Goose vodka? There's a massive markup on that.
But the little gin is fantastic.
The little gin is absolutely fine. Absolutely.
Really nice bottle too. Nice bottle.
We have from Tom's ventured on his bottle of Bloom. It says pomelo, chamomile, and honeysuckle listed on the bottle. So that sounds nice. But we'll talk about that kind of flavouring a little bit later when we talk about the different ways to make gin, because those flowers, you can't put those in a still. You're not going to get the flavours out of them in the same way as you will a juniper berry or citrus peel. So that has to be made in quite a specific way. Victoria says there's a French alpine liqueur called Genepi. Oh, Genepi. Yes, I think many people that have spent times in the Alps have had Genepi before. I think based on juniper. Is it based on juniper? It's not. Wouldn't surprise me.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. That's what's on the bottle.
Yeah. I don't know if I think that's more of a kind of eau de vie. I think that tends to be slightly rougher spirit, and based like those kind of spirits are made normally from like pomace. So pomace is what's left behind after you've made wine. So the juice that would be too harsh to put into normal wine production to make the wine taste really pleasant. They make that into a fairly unpleasant wine, and then they distill it into these eau de vies, and they either then sell them as Genovese and stuff like that, or they sell them as industrial alcohol and things. But you wouldn't have this such a neutral spirit to start off with. So gin is, the base alcohol that goes into gin is more neutral than the base alcohol that goes into Genovese, I believe.
They both have their uses.
They both have their uses. Yeah. I think Genovese more likely to make you go blind than gin.
Very useful.
In my personal experience, anyway, certainly temporarily. Cool. Do we have any other questions at this point?
My Bombay Sapphire, it says vapor infused.
Yes, so that's part of the next bit. So that's a lovely segue onto my next part. So what I'll do, I'll just put you all on mute again and then go through the next bit.
Tom, tell her to shut up.
You will.
Your mother.
Right, okay, but again, you do have the capacity to unmute yourself if you really would like to speak, or please do go and type in the chat and I'll keep an eye on that. But yes, so we've got, where did I go? Back to here. We have 3 legal definitions of gin, and they're called these different things on the labels on the basis of how they're made. So Tom, this sort of harks to what you were just mentioning, what it said on the label there. They're labeling terms. The first is just gin. Fine, if it just says gin, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't mean that it's got the base level of standards that it has to adhere to be called gin. We have then distilled gin, which I'll explain again in a minute. And then the final one is London gin or London dry gin. Which I think is probably a very recognisable term. That's what you're going to see on your bottles of Gordon's, I think, on Tanqueray and Bombay Sapphire and stuff like that, on these traditional styles. So what I'll do is I'll just explain what these mean. So if it just says gin on it, that basically means it is a spirit that has been, it's a neutral spirit, like a bit like vodka, but slightly less alcoholic than vodka when it is produced from the still. Vodka has to be like 96%. I think gin is going to be a little bit below that, but still pretty high and fairly neutral, fairly pure alcohol. And then it's going to be flavoured, however, mostly with juniper and some other things, and bottled, and then it can just be called gin. And so a lot of these will be flavoured with, like Ros was saying, with her juniper essential oils, something very, very similar to that, but a food standard version of it. Of the juniper, and again similar things with citrus oils, lots of essential oils and flavorings called nature identical or natural flavorings, and they're just added, and it's a very nice and cheap way of producing a flavored spirit, and then it's bottled, and that is gin. So that's your basic gin. Then we have London gin or London dry gin. Now, even though it says London gin on the bottle, doesn't have to be made in London, or it doesn't even have to be made in the UK. It can be made anywhere that you in the world. The style that we're talking about, London dry gin, means that every flavour that is in that bottle has been distilled with it. So just to explain what I mean, you would distill your spirit to a high strength, but then you would get a separate type of still, normally what they call a Carter head still, which is a still. So if I take you back to our picture of a still again. So this is a normal type of still. So imagine this bit here, where we've got the liquid. Imagine you had an area in here, in this top bit, which is like a cage where you could store a load of botanicals. So say a load of berries, a load of citrus peel, a load of orris root, all these different things would be in this cage, and the alcohol would be coming from, like, evaporating up and going through, passing through those botanicals, And this would be happening at different times depending on how volatile each of the botanicals are and stuff, but at different points during that final distillation process, you're going to be getting different amounts of flavors from each of these botanicals that are in the still with it. Does that make sense? Sort of. This is considered to be high quality because if you just flavor something and then you taste it, especially something that's a spirit, when you taste it, you get the lingering flavor is of burning, is of alcohol, and that's what you're left with, because the flavor is just there when you taste it. But if you have distilled the alcohol with the flavors, they're infused together. I'm sure that's not the scientific word, but they're as one, as a particle, if you like, much more so. They're married together. So when you can taste the alcohol for a long time, you're tasting the flavors for the whole of that time as well. And that's why these are really much, much better if you're going to be making a cocktail with gin as well, because it's the flavor of the cocktail is going to be the long lasting flavor that you get after you've had all the fruit juice with it and the sweetness and everything else. It's really important to then, if you want to have a high quality one, to have these flavors that are going to stay there for the length of time that you can taste the alcohol. Does that make sense? Maybe. So that's considered, out of those two, that's considered, the London dry gin is considered to be the highest quality. But then we have another third category, which is called distilled gin. And this is, if you like, a more modern style. And this is where you get things like chamomile and honeysuckle. So if you were to put chamomile and honeysuckle into a still and distill alcohol through it, you can imagine what is going to happen to petals and flowers and soft parts of a plant. Is going to collapse. Or a classic, I don't think anybody had one when I looked at your bottles, but the Hendrix is a big producer of cucumber flavoured gins. Again, cucumber is not going to last very long in a still when you're like trying to diffuse it with like the flavours of alcohol. That's just not going to happen. So what distilled gin is where you have your juniper and all these hard botanicals that are distilled in this Carter head or similar style still to create these high quality base spirit with the juniper flavors. But then afterwards, they will macerate these other flavors in with it. So then like a tea bag, you dunk some of your cucumber or your flowers or whatever it is on top of that you want to put in. Does that make sense? So it's like hybrid of the two. So if it says distilled gin, doesn't mean it's not as good as London dry gin. It just means they're probably using a slightly different range of botanicals too. Cool. So I'm just going to unmute you all. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well done.
Good. That is really, that's all I want to sort of go on at you about in terms of knowledge. What I would like us to do is just to do a little experiment with the gins all together. Unless, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, yeah.
What's your favourite gin, Ruth? Why?
I really like gin. So, I mean, I like this. This is sort of the gin that got me back into gin. But when I was younger, I think the first time someone gave me gin and said, oh, this is a really nice one, was a Tanqueray. So I've always got like a soft spot for that, and the Bombay Sapphire as well. Back in the day, those are the absolute pinnacles of gin as I knew it. But yeah, there's loads of lovely gin. The gin Mare that I mentioned earlier, that I always like that one. And there's a mad one from California, which is made in pine forests. And it, to be honest, again, I don't know if you'd really say it was juniper dominant, but it tastes just like, it's really sort of smells like a pine forest. It's really, really fresh and nice. Wow. Like, doesn't smell like Flash floor cleaner or anything like that. But yeah, there's so many different ones. I like the quite spicy ones as well. Or ones that are just a bit cheaper. Ones on special offer.
Special offer, yeah.
Do you have favourites, Sam? What was yours?
Oh, I don't know. No, I like the one that is it Anna. Are you drinking Rosa?
No, I'm drinking Malfi. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's like
I really like
Italian.
that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Really like that. I like the flavoured ones. So I love the blood orange one.
Oh, that's nice. Yes. Lovely.
Is that flavour introduced afterwards then?
What's that, sorry?
So with the blood orange one, would the flavour be actually introduced after all the distilling process?
Yes, so unless they're using like the dried peel only, I think with the blood orange, I think they are using the soft parts of the fruit as well, because, well, I don't know that for definite, but it tastes like they are. So they would have to be macerating with that, I think, or using an essential oil. Not the use of essential oils isn't always a negative thing. It's just if you're only using essential oils, it's normally that you're just doing it in the cheapest way. But sometimes they are adding really high quality essential oils as an extra, which can be a really good thing too.
Thank you. I'm going to get my other tonic.
So, if you could pour it doesn't have to be very much because I don't want you to feel like you're wasting any, but just pour a little bit. I'm sure you won't struggle to drink it anyway. But just a little bit of neat gin into a glass.
For some wine.
No.
Say to them to
when we taste gin, it's a little bit different to when we taste wine. So when you're tasting wine, you swirl it around the glass and then you take a big old sniff. If you're going to do that with spirits, you're going to numb your nose, and then you won't be able to smell.
That's what I've done.
It can be a bit tempting to do it if you're like me, if you're used to wine tasting. Yeah. But a guy that taught me about whiskey tasting taught me this wonderful method, which is you say hello with each nostril. So you go, hello. 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 Like that. And then you just let gently.
Oh.
And the first time, and you will just get alcohol potentially the very first bit, but just don't inhale that too much because you will numb. But then the second light whiff,
I think I might have numbed.
Start to get more of the aromatics. And when it's neat like this, so different aromatics will come off at different percentage of alcohols. That's one of the reasons why some of the higher quality gins will be sold with a higher alcohol level, because they will hold on to these aromatics better at the higher concentration. So at this high concentration, you're more likely to get maybe the spicy, the peppery, the woody aromatics off it more.
I see.
And then if you just have a little bit of, I don't know, I've got some water here, or a little bit of tonic, and just a little drop in there.
Tonic. Which would be your preference? Because I have both.
I think it's the purest way to do it is to do it with some water. But obviously, some people prefer to put tonic instead because you're more likely to want to drink it afterwards. So it's totally up to you. But a little bit of water, and then you'll find, and you can give it a little bit more of a smell then, because it's slightly less powerful. But you get much more of the citrus quality coming off, and the more floral quality. And then if you water it down a little bit more again, and again, it intensifies the floral qualities.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a very different character that you make.
Very different.
Yeah.
Yep. And if you do this, if is anybody here, are you whiskey drinkers at all?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
You'll probably be quite used to doing this maybe then with a bit of whiskey. People often will be adding just a little drop of water just to release different aromatics, and it's a similar process for all spirits tastings really.
I didn't know
the same.
Mm.
So it's totally, there's nothing right or wrong in terms of which you prefer, but when you choose how much tonic water to mix with it, you are then going to affect the flavour you get from the gin. And so depending on how fussy someone is, if you go to a gin distillery, the people that are there that really love their product, they're probably going to have an opinion about which tonic you should mix it with and exactly how much you should probably mix it with, to which they think is the perfect amount. But obviously you have to mix it to your perfect amount to see how much you like it. But yeah, the other thing that I wanted to see was just to show you a few examples. Hopefully they won't all drop off sort of chop the berries in half so they don't roll off. But just rosemary from the garden, or lemon, or lime, blueberries. I put blueberries and raspberries in mine because I think it looks nice. But also they freeze really well, so you can use them like little gin ice cubes if you want, instead of putting. So because the watering down of the gin will have an effect. Sometimes it's nice to use a frozen berry instead, because it won't water your gin down as it melts. So that's quite nice too. But the thing with raspberries is they will definitely give an extra flavour to the gin. And depending on what gin you're tasting, you know, especially, and things like rosemary, you'll notice it's very, very powerful smell and aromatic. So it's only for if you like that smell that it will. Certain gins will go better with different garnishes. But it's just some fun that you can have. And I think in the email I put a little link to an app that you can get if you want to get really geekily into it, which is the Gin Ventry, which you can look up on that app, whatever type of gin it is that you're drinking, and they will tell you what they think is the best garnish to go with it. So that's basically it. That's all I was going to say. But does anybody have any other questions about it?
Yeah, Ruth, how critical is the alcohol that you start with? Because you said it's sometimes made with grain. Does it matter too much?
Well, yes, it depends. If you're going to make it into a really neutral spirit, so if you're making it into super, super neutral in a column still, and it doesn't matter as much, but you're still going to tell the difference. So if you make it out of a sugar-based spirit, like a white rum is, then you are going to be able to taste a little hint of that sugar there in the background. The same with if you make it out of grain, which is what we're used to, you wouldn't notice the difference because it's what we're used to, but you would taste different if you're going to make it out of grapes or something else. Even though it becomes very neutral, it does keep a very small amount of the original flavour. That's how, if you're learning to do blind tastings of spirits, that you have to sort of start to look for these little traits that they have, but they are very small, but they are there.
The percentage alcohol changes, it can be quite different with newer gins. I see the Gordon's London Dry is 37.5,
yes,
and the Dakin's we've got is 42. Wow. How much does it go up to? What is the sort of
I think
top
I have
end?
seen one that is about 50. And again, it will hold on to more. I did write this down actually, but so if you're buying it in the UK, then you're going to pay for 1 litre of pure alcohol in a spirit. So say it was 100%, you pay £28.74 for just duty. So that's before VAT and stuff. So if you then equate that to a 40% bottle, then that's £11.50. So then you can take off a quid for it being a 37. Well, probably not quite a quid, but a bit. So every time they make it more expensive, every time they make it higher alcohol, they have to add on duty to every single bottle that they sell, which is, you might think, oh, it's 50p or whatever, but it's eating into their margins every single time. So people try to not do that as much as possible unless they really, really are trying to aim for that top market. So it can be a sign that they really are caring about them holding on to all of the aromatics and all the botanical characteristics as much as possible. Or it can just be they want to look like they are, so it makes it look more premium. But yeah, so the main reason that you get the weaker ones is because it's cheaper to them, so they can then sell it for less. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
make more.
But yeah, if all of the aromas, the higher the alcohol level, all of the aromas will be held better, and they will only then get released when you water it down with the tonic.
Oh, that's right. That's very interesting.
But it will.
Local people can't get in.
Are there any other questions?
That was brilliant, Ruth.
No.
Really
Thank
interesting.
you very much for coming. Did everybody receive the PDF with the info? Yeah, cool. If you haven't got that, then let me know. If you do want to ask any other questions about it, then do let me know that separately as well. But thank you.
Sorry, I have a
Yep.
That was
What was
grand,
that?
Ruth, huh?
I'm sorry if you might have covered this because I turned up late.